Hey guys, today we're going to talk about the world of European culture. So, what we're going to talk about today, a lot of art and different forms of art, including painting, including architecture, including plays. So, you can see Shakespeare in the middle there. And we'll talk about even music a little bit, and then we'll get into some new political thought as well. So, lots to cover today. It's pretty interesting. I like doing this one. It's kind of a fun one. So, all right, here we go. Let's get started. So, Mannerism is going to emerge in Italy in the 1520s and 30s. So, this is a new form of art and it's replacing Renaissance art. And it has, like, if you look at it, it looks similar to Renaissance art. So, the difference is that the um, the figures are disproportionate, okay, in large part. So it broke down the values of balance, harmony, moderation, proportion that they used in the Renaissance era. And so you're going to see more elongated figures. They're going to show a lot more suffering, heightened emotions, and then religious ecstasy. So you can see, like in this one, like her head is like way too small for her body and things like that. So it just looks kind of different. So El Greco, this is a piece by El Greco. He portrayed elongated figures in unusual yellows and greens against usually a black background. Um, and so El Greco meaning obviously the Greek, so he was Greek. But the mood he depicts reflects the tensions created by the religious upheavals of the Reformation. So art often reflects what's going on in history. And so after the Reformation, during and after the Reformation, Europe was in a time of crisis, and that's kind of being reflected in what's going on in regards to art. Okay, so Baroque is going to replace Mannerism, and Baroque is much more stable. So now that in history we're moving into a place of more stability, we are moving into a place where we're having more absolute power of the kings. That is being reflected in art as well. So this is going to start in Italy, and this is actually going to eventually be adopted by the Catholic Reform movement. And so a lot of churches in that are going to be very ornate, because that's what Baroque is about gaudiness and showing power. That's like the biggest thing is showing power. Um, so it's trying to join the Renaissance ideals with the newly revived spiritual feelings. So it's known for its dramatic effects that arouse emotions. So, like I said, Baroque was used to show power. The best example of this, obviously, is the Palace of Versailles, which we talked about in the last set of notes. Um, So if you go to the Palace of Versailles and you have to sit and talk to the king, and this is his house, this is where he lives, this is where the government is run out of, you're going to be a little bit intimidated because it is extremely ornate. But other monarchs are going to try to copy this, because it does show intimidation, it does show power. So, all right. So one of the things that we're going to, I want to just kind of explain to you is Baroque music. So, um, I'm logged. Sorry about that. I was on Skyward, and now we are. There we are. My bad. So Baroque music, um, was used as a way to once again show power. But so it's very like emotional. Probably the most famous piece of Baroque music is Handel's Messiah. So I'm gonna play you just a little piece of this. It's only about 4 minutes long. It's probably something you're familiar with. It's called the Hallelujah Chorus, and this one's performed by the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. But George Frederick Handel, Johann Sebastian Bach, those are probably the two most famous Baroque artists, Baroque composers, I guess. Um, and then we'll talk about more. So, Baroque is going to be replaced eventually by classical music in about like the 1770s. Baroque will go away and then classical will replace it. And so, those are guys like Beethoven and um, Mozart and guys like that. So, this is pre-Beethoven and Mozart. So, anyway, this is Handel's Messiah. All right, we're going to stop it there. So, the Messiah is actually about a 2 hour piece, so it's pretty lengthy. So that's just a small part of it, but probably the most famous part from it. So probably the one you're most familiar with. Okay, moving on. So the Throne of Saint Peter. So Gian Lorenzo Bernini completed St. Peter's Basilica, which is where the Pope is, that's in Vatican City. And he completed it with a wooden throne of St. Peter. And the way he made it, so this whole thing is wood, which is pretty impressive. This is one of my most famous, like my most favorite pieces to talk about. But the way he made it, it's all made out of wood, and it here's the throne right here. So he made it in a way that kind of makes it look like the throne is hovering in like these clouds, with the rays of sunshine shining down onto the Pope. So this is the Pope's throne. Um, so it just kind of shows like that God is like raining down on the Pope. So I think it's cool. But that's in Vatican City. Um, Golden Age of Literature. So obviously England is going to have a cultural flourishing during Queen Elizabeth's reign, and that is all due to William Shakespeare. So his works were performed at the Globe Theatre, and he was an actor and a shareholder in the acting troupe, the Lord Chamberlain's Men. So this is one of the first times we see the lower classes attend with upper classes. So the lower classes would stand and they would be down in the bottom here. And then the upper classes would be in the balconies, and the balcony goes all the way around the stage, so it kind of makes a circle around the stage. Um, so anyway, so what they would do is the lower classes, especially, like they would make a whole day of it. Like go, they would bring lunches, like they would bring food, and they would have a good old time. And then the upper classes, just kind of stayed in their boxes and kind of look down upon the lower classes. But what's important about Shakespeare is he's viewed as a universal genius. And he used masterful language and showed deep insight into human psychology through his plays. And like if you look at like Romeo and Juliet, for example, which is probably his most famous one, and it's something that you can enjoy even today. So 500 years later, we still watch his work, which I think is really impressive. And it's all because he understood human psychology. Like people don't really change. The makeup of people don't change. The world around us changes, but the way we think in that still the same 500 years later. And so he was able to capture that, which I think is absolutely incredible. Um, so one of the things he did too was he invented a lot of words that we use today. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but if he didn't have a word for something, he just made one up, which is kind of cool too. So a lot of words we commonly use, and that's something that if you want to Google, probably wouldn't be the worst idea. Okay. Um, so in Spain, there's a couple important playwrights. So one is Lope de Vega, and he wrote almost 1,500 plays. They were witty, charming, action-packed, realistic, like pretty good. And then Miguel de Cervantes is probably the most famous, and he wrote Don Quixote. So Don Quixote is a knight with really lofty ideals, and he wants to go and he wants to make the world a better place, basically. And then Sancho Panza, that's this guy. He's a little fat, earthly realist, his sidekick. And so as they go on these adventures, Don Quixote's lofty ideals get a little bit more put into place, I guess, by Sancho Panza. But in the end, each come to value the other's perspective. So the moral of the story basically is that vision and hard work are necessary to achieve whatever you're trying to achieve. Okay. Moving on to political thought. So there's two guys we're going to talk about here, Thomas Hobbes and then John Locke. They have very, very different views of human nature. And so Thomas Hobbes is going to write a book called Leviathan. So this is the book here. And a Leviathan is an ancient Greek monster that, in Thomas Hobbes' case, he says the king is the head of this monster, and then the people are the body. Okay, so the head controls the state. All right, we'll talk about that in a minute. But before society, he says, there was a state of nature. So, what a state of nature is, if you ever take a philosophy class, they'll talk about what's called a state of nature. And a state of nature is like any type of society where there's no institution. So, there's no government, there's no church, there's just people just being people. Okay, so he said before there were institutions, before there was church, before there was government, before there was anything, he said life is brutal and violent because human nature is self interested. Okay, so he says that people are selfish and they will destroy each other in order to get ahead. So he said to keep people from doing that, we need to have a government that has an absolute ruler. Okay, so he argues for what'll be known as enlightened absolutism. So where you have this creature where the head is the monarch, he makes all the decisions for the body. But the monarch, the head can't exist on its own. It needs the body, but the body also needs the head. So it's supposed to be kind of a working relationship. Okay, and then we have John Locke. So John Locke, vastly different. So he wrote several books. The most famous is the Two Treatises of Government. And he said, before society, so in a state of nature, he said, people lived in freedom and equality, not violence and war, like what Thomas Hobbes said. And so John Locke said that we have natural rights. So rights that we're just naturally born with just because we're humans. Okay, so he says that there are 3 natural rights, and they are life, liberty, and property. Okay, so you have a right to live, you have a right to be free, and you have a right to control your own property. And he said that we had trouble protecting these rights, and so that's why we established government, because our government needs to protect those rights. Okay, so these ideas are reflected in the Declaration of Independence. So Thomas Jefferson used a lot of John Locke ideas when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. So he is going to actually change it to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So the reason why they did that is our founding fathers are a bunch of rich guys, and they didn't want people thinking that they were encouraging what will eventually be known as communism, because communism wasn't a thing yet. Basically, they didn't want people thinking that if I own a house and you want my house, you could just go take it. Okay, it wasn't like that. So they changed it to pursuit of happiness. So you have the right to pursue your own happiness. Okay, as long as it doesn't infringe on other people's rights. And so John Locke says it's the government's job to protect those rights. And so there's a contract between people and government that establishes mutual obligations. And so if that contract is broken, then the people have the right to overthrow that government. And this is the entire basis of the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence. So in the Declaration of Independence, the first part of it is Thomas Jefferson is saying, here's all the rights that we're supposed to have. Here's 27 reasons or 27 different ways that George III, who was the King of England at the time, that he's broken this contract. And then the last part of it is the Declaration of Independence, where we're actually declaring independence. So he's saying because he is this terrible person and he's this terrible king, we are going to break away from him. It's our right as a free people to break away from him. Okay, so this will become the basis of the American Revolution and then the U.S. Constitution, and it's the basis for what we live today. So not only is it going to affect us, obviously, this type of political thought is going to affect the French revolutions. They have many revolutions. And it's going to affect the creation of democracies all throughout Europe. So once we create a stable democracy in the United States, other countries are going to follow. And that's exactly what John Locke wanted. Okay, that's kind of the basis of his ideas, is that we are free. We have a government to protect us. If that government doesn't protect our rights, then we need to make a government that will. Okay, and so that's why we broke away from England, and that's why we are the republic that we are today. So, all right, that is it for today. I hope you guys all have a good rest of the day. Please don't forget to complete your processor.